Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Dark Humour, Volume 2. Rabbits Have Long Ears by Lawrence F. Willard. The Man Who Wouldn't Sign Up by Tom Purdom. For Services Rendered by J. F. Bone. Once Upon a Monbeast by Charles E. Fritch. Pogo Planet by Donald A. Wollheim. Rabbits Have Long Ears by Lawrence F. Willard. Originally published in Worlds of If Science Fiction, August 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Commander Loja gave orders to his navigator to bring the ship in on the satellite out of sight of the prying telescopes, which no doubt existed on such an invitingly green planet. He was a cautious man and didn't intend to lose any more crew members if he could help it. He could tell by the unusually poor handling of the ship that the crew was still demoralized from the brush with the high IQ slugs on that last planet which they had approached so directly. They'd lost 3 men in that scrap, one of them a highly valued anthropologist. There were only 2 more of those left in the freeze locker. Too bad it couldn't have been a radio operator. There were plenty of those on ice. The commander's thoughts were interrupted by a second officer who entered without the customary military burp. "I'll forgive you this time, Montresig," said the commander, "but we can't relax regulations now, can we? Anything new to report on this planet?" "No, your loftiness," said Montresig, after giving a belated burp. "There's nothing to add to what we already know, but then we've just come to rest on this clinker of a moon. I don't imagine, however, that we've located our long-lost ancestors or our mythical home planet. There doesn't seem to be a race in this galaxy that walks upright on 2 good legs with 2 arms, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, and other standard equipment." "Could be we'll find one this time," said the commander. "We know it's an oxygen planet, and that there are intelligent beings there, judging from the cities we can see and their use of radio." "Maybe," grumbled Montresig, "but they won't be men. If they're not slugs, they'll be talking fish or intellectual spiders or something equally repulsive. And I can tell you one thing, whatever we find, if it has brains, it will want to fight." "Now, Montresig, don't be bitter. We've only examined a couple hundred planets. There are many more, and you know we'll have to take a look at as many as we can. I tell you, however, we won't take any more chances. Unless we find out they're pretty much like us, we won't go near the damn planet." "How do you propose to find that out, your loftiness? We can't see anything that small by telescope. We haven't learned much so far by listening to them, and it's pretty dangerous business using the dredge." "Ah, my dear Montresig, the crux of the matter is that we can tell about them, I believe, from listening to them. Judging from the reports I got from communications, this is the talkingest planet in the galaxy. That utilizes the entire radio spectrum we know, and, I suspect, some portions of it we don't know. All they do is talk. There must be millions of individuals on that planet jabbering in a dozen different languages. Our language technicians have decoded 2 of the major tongues already, and have fed the information to the main computer. All radio signals in those languages are now being fed directly to the computer, and the information is being classified and cross-referenced." Montresig's furry countenance brightened. "Then we won't have to send down the dredge?" "I hope not, Montresig. I do not like to bring strange life forms aboard the ship. Remember planet 187 in the Zorgid system?" Montresig shuddered. "I'll never forget. When that monster materialized in the hold, I snapped on the stasis field and it had no effect. I tried every last trick in the bag, including 7 kinds of poison gas. Luckily, the dredge operator was able to catch him and throw him back where he came from, but the hold was a shambles and 2 men had to have expensive repair work." "Well," said the commander. "I don't like the dredge at all, but I suppose it's better than landing and having to do battle with slugs. I swear I was certain there was no intelligent life on that planet. By the way, I'm having an anthropologist thawed out now. That leaves only one more in the freeze locker, and we can't operate without one. Take care nothing happens to him, Montresig." Commander Lozier made the sign of dismissal, and Montresig burped gracefully and withdrew. The commander signalled communications. After a considerable delay, a burp sounded from the speaker on the wall, and a voice announced, "Tronriff here. May I serve your loftiness?" "Tronriff," said the commander. "The delay is inexcusable. Does the computer have its belly full yet?" "Your loftiness, the reference tapes are full, but the machine is unable to present a full picture of the dominant life form. It appears, however, they are much like us in general body shape. Unfortunately, we can get no reference point from which to judge their size. They're exceedingly ferocious and bloodthirsty, and apparently war among themselves continuously." "I'm tempted to leave now," said the commander. "I'll have to use the dredge, I suppose. Are you sure it won't do some good to listen to their communications a while longer?" The speaker was silent for a moment. Then Tronriff spoke. "I don't like to mention this, your loftiness, but my engineers have found several unidentified types of emission besides those carrying speech frequencies. They think that one particular type characterized by an extremely broad frequency range just might be transmission of visual images." "I don't believe it," said the commander. "We've been trying to do that for hundreds of years without success, and so far as we've never found another race in the galaxy as far advanced technologically as our own. These people don't even have space flight." "They have artificial satellites up," said Tronriff. "We're monitoring signals from one, and from what I gather, they're apt to have something up on this moon before long." "Any chance of finding out how they transmit visual images? If they really do?" "Not a chance," said Tronriff. "My engineers can't even conceive of a device that could convert these signals into a picture." "That's all, Tronriff. Notify Montresig that is to meet me immediately in the dredge room with the anthropologist and a dredge operator." The commander sighed. What irony that the only truly peaceful race in the galaxy should be the only one to discover interstellar flight. For 4,000 years the Ka had had their ships and had colonized hundreds of planets until they had lost track on which one they started from. In all that time they had avoided planets with intelligent life, had never found any other ships in space. Now, thought the commander, we have to go looking for trouble just to satisfy our curiosity as to where we started from. Montresig introduced the newly thawed anthropologist to him on the dredge room balcony, and Commander Lozier briefed him on the importance of his job. "We don't believe this race has any connection with ours," said the commander. "It's too savage. And yet we haven't found another race as far advanced in science, nor one that appears to be so similar to ours. Our problem is to find out a little more about them, their physical size, whether it's safe to contact them, which I personally doubt." "Is it your intention to bring back one of these intelligent beings with the dredge?" asked the anthropologist. "You know better than that, or maybe you don't," said the commander. "Anyway, you should know that it is against our code of ethics to cause harm to any intelligent being. That dredge is set to reject any living creature capable of a high order of thought, and that control is sealed against our use. The idea is to bring back artifacts that might tell us something about the people of the planet. Maybe they have a written language and have something that approximates our scrolls. Maybe they have drawings. I'd especially like to snag one of the visual image receptors our communications engineers think they have." "The dredge operator is ready," said Montresig. "The computer controls have been switched to this balcony and the stasis beam has been checked." Commander Lozier looked up at the dredge operator in his glassed-in booth high on the opposite wall of the hold. He gave a quick hand signal and transferred his attention to the floor of the vast hold below him. A shimmering mistiness began to form in the centre of the floor. Commander Loja could feel the tension of his companions as they waited. It was a blind grab. The dredge operator had no way of knowing what would be scooped up at the end of his force beam. Slowly, the mistiness grew more dense, darkening to an impenetrable cloud, and then vanished with an audible snap, leaving a strange alien mechanism on the floor of the hold. It resembled a huge cylinder resting on tractor-like treads. From the balcony, the men scurrying across the floor seemed dwarfed by the object. Unheeding of any danger, they swarmed over it, measuring, testing, amassing information to be fed to the computer. "Holy ghosts of my departed ancestors!" gasped Montresig. "What is it?" "You know about as much about it as I do, my dear fellow," the commander said. "As soon as the engineers get through poking at it, we'll find out what the computer thinks it is." "I'll bet it's a weapon of some sort," said Montresig. "They're almost always fighting down there, according to the data we have. There's frequent mention of a device called a hydrogen bomb. If it's what I think it is, I have no desire to visit them in person." A figure detached itself from the group of men surrounding the huge contrivance and came hurrying to the elevator entrance beneath the balcony. In a moment he appeared on the balcony, burped perfunctorily, and handed Commander Loja several sheets of script. The commander read them into a microphone grill which was part of the remote panel feeding into the main computer. He waited until a red light glowed, indicated that the material had been integrated. He pressed a stud and spoke into the microphone again. "Classify," he said. "Information in storage banks reveals object to be a gun," said the loudspeaker. "Gun, an instrument variously known as revolver, heater, rod, Betsy, automatic, typewriter, gat, which refer to carried by gunmen, cowboys, mobsters, killers, cons, doughboys, cops, G-men, marines, gangsters, and kids, which refer to weapon fires projectile known as bullet, lead, shell, slug, which refer to solid projectile pierces body of individual causing serious injury and death. It is used with that intention. No information on size of instrument previous to captured specimen, which is nearly 14 zeng, about 5 1/4 man lengths long. Sample excerpt demonstrating use. Blinky snapped the gun from his holster and fired from the hip. Sound of explosion. The big cowpoke grabbed at his chest, and blood spurted between his fingers. With a look of surprise on his face, he slumped to the bar-room floor. "What do you make of that?" asked the commander. "I'd have been surprised too," said Montresig. "The bloodthirsty giants," said the anthropologist. "If that's a pocket weapon, they'd be so big you couldn't get one into this hold." "I don't believe it," said the commander. "I think there's something wrong somewhere. Possibly guns come in various sizes. This could be a stationary weapon, perhaps, to blow buildings apart instead of people, though I can't figure out why anybody would want to. I'm going to send the dredge back once more to make sure we aren't being misled." "I think you're wrong," said Montresig. "All evidence does point to a race of giants, evil creatures at best, even if maybe they do have 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth like us. Not that I don't think it is a good idea to send the dredge back," he added hastily at the sight of Commander Loja's glowering countenance. The commander signalled to the dredge operator again, and they waited while he returned the gun to wherever he got it, and fished for something else from the surface of the green planet. The anthropologist cleared his throat. "You can't deny that the telescope shows us the most gigantic cities to be found anywhere in the galaxy." "That doesn't necessarily mean that the inhabitants are physically large, only that there may be a lot of them," said the commander. "Or both?" Their attention turned to the floor of the hold as the opaque cloud rapidly grew darker and vanished again with a snap. Montresig's reaction was the same as before. "Great shades of my holy ancestors," he said. "What is it?" "It is assuredly an animal," said the commander, "not unlike some we have on our own planets. I'll have the biologist and medics examine it." He turned to the anthropologist. "You go too, Alphys." The animal, which had appeared stunned when it first appeared, now began to turn around, making clicking noises on the floor. As the men approached it from all directions, it looked about nervously, opened its mouth to show some glistening teeth, and proceeded to make a long, harsh noise. Alphys made the mistake of approaching too closely to the beast, which wheeled and kicked him head over heels some distance away. Montressig touched a red button on the railing, and stasis beams converged on the animal, freezing it instantly. It toppled over and lay stiffly on the floor of the hold. Alphys dragged himself to his feet and shouted up to the balcony, "Ask the computer about animals with long ears." The commander spoke into the microphone again. "Four-legged animal, long ears, classify." "Rabbit," said the computer. "An animal variously known as bunny, hare, coney, Peter, Uncle Wiggly, strong rear legs, progresses over ground erratically, consumes vegetation, multiplies with great rapidity, lays egg at Easter time. It is generally considered timid and is hunted for food. Sample excerpt demonstrating relationship. Lon climbed over the stone wall and continued across the woodlot towards his cabin, the carcasses of 3 rabbits slung over his shoulder. There would be rabbit stew tonight." "Holy gods in their celestial quarters," said Montressig. "Did you hear that? Is there any question in your mind now about the size and ferocity of these people?" "Considerable," said the commander. "That computer has made mistakes before. Witness that last planet. Those were supposed to be garden snails, those slugs that gave us such a walloping. I don't think we can get the right information through to it." "But your loftiness," wailed Montressig. "Everything adds up. You can see for yourself. The giant cities, they're warring on each other. The information the computer gave us. It isn't safe to land on that planet." "No, I suppose not," sighed the commander. "But do you realize the implications? Here we have a highly advanced race just ready to take off into space. And according to our information, they are savage, war-making giants. If I bring that news back, our supreme goodness is apt to issue orders to evacuate several hundred planets and move to some other galaxy. Let's try the dredge once more." Commander signaled the dredge operator, and waited a reasonable length of time before it was informed that something was wrong with it, and that it would be some time before repairs could be made. "I give up," said Commander Lozier. "I have orders not to land on a questionable planet, and I've learned my lesson. Either that computer has a few loose connections, or those people are broadcasting pure nonsense. I just don't believe in giants, much less in scientific ones. Get ready to leave, Montressig, and see that you make an accurate written report of this whole situation." "What do we do with the animal, your loftiness?" "The dredge is busted. So what do you think we can do with it? Heave it out the airlock. It can stay here on the moon until the first explorers come up from the planet, which won't be long, and they can have rabbit stew." The great ship lifted from the dark moonscape, leaving behind the frozen form of the first Earth being to have crossed space, a surprise for the crew of the first manned moon rocket, if not the makings of rabbit stew. Somewhere, 1,000,000 miles beyond the sun, the ship accelerated rapidly. The commander looked up from his desk as Montressig entered smartly with a precision burp. "Alphys is back in the freeze locker and repairs are going forward on the dredge, but it'll be a long job." "It doesn't matter," said the commander. "We're going home. I'm committed to bringing back a report on this planet now, but I don't like it and will advise further study of it by other expeditions before any desperate measures are taken, such as evacuating the galaxy." "It's funny about that rabbit," said Montressig. "I noticed as we shoved it out the lock that it had semicircles of some hard metal, probably iron, nailed to its feet." "That is peculiar," said the commander. Almost like the shoes we attach to the feast's hooves before children ride them. Just for the fun of it, Montressig, why don't you give that information to the computer and see what it says?" "Can't," said Montressig. "I wiped the memory tanks clean. I don't think it means much anyway. A rabbit's a rabbit, shoes or no shoes." The commander nodded, and Montressig burped and withdrew.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story.
The Man Who Wouldn't Sign Up by Tom Purdom, writing as Thomas E. Purdom, originally published in Infinity, October 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. All his life, people had been trying to get Henry Westing to sign up. They were all signing up themselves, and they wanted everybody else to sign up too. In college, it had been the fraternities. Mr. Westing hadn't tried to join one. "But you've got to belong to something," they said. "Everybody does." "I don't." "Sure you do. You're just being rebellious." "Perhaps." "Everybody's got to belong. Ask any psychologist." "Perhaps. I wouldn't know." After college, it had been work. He had lost 3 jobs in a row for the same reason. "We're sorry, Westing, but you just don't seem to fit in with the group." "Don't I do my work well?" "Yes, but you don't seem to belong. We like men who consider themselves part of the company, not just people who work here." In the end, he had found a job in a large travel agency in the centre of Philadelphia. This is a business in which everyone at least pretends to be cynical about his work, so Westing was able to keep his position no matter how he acted. Of course, by this time, he had learned to keep his mouth shut. All around him, he watched people signing up. "You've got to have something bigger than yourself," they said. "You've got to belong." He watched them do it, and went on living his own life. He loved concerts and books and plays. He loved his friends, who were good company and whom he saw often. He loved a couple of girls too, and hoped that someday he would love one well enough to marry her. He lived a very happy life, and belonged to nothing. Then one night in January, someone knocked on his door. It was a Saturday, and he was just getting dressed to go to the Academy of Music. He opened the door of his apartment and looked into the hall. There was a young man standing there. He had black-rimmed glasses and a crew cut. He wore a slim, well-tailored suit. "Mr. Westing?" "Yes." "I'm from the organization. We'd like you to join." "What organization?" "The organization. The organization for people who don't belong to any organization." "I'm afraid I'm not interested." "But you must be. It says here that you don't belong to anything. We're here to give you a chance to belong." "What's the purpose of the organization?" "It gives its members a feeling of belonging to something. Everybody's joining. You don't want to be left out, do you?" "Not if I can help it. But I'm afraid you'll have to try somebody else." "I can't. We never give up." "I see. Good night, young man." He tried to close the door. Before he was quite certain what was happening, the young man had slipped into the apartment. "I'm going to a concert," Mr. Westing said. "They're playing Brahms's First. I've never heard it, and I've been looking forward to hearing it ever since I heard his second. I'd appreciate it if you left." "But don't you want to belong, Mr. Westing?" "No." "Not to anything?" "No." The young man shook his head. "But most people are glad to join. We offer them what they've been looking for all their lives." "Then go see them." He put on his jacket and adjusted his tie. "Care for a drink?" "I don't drink." "Why not?" "It interferes with my work. We're out to double the size of the organization. I work very hard at it." "Do you? Why?" "It gives me a sense of belonging." Mr. Westing started for the door. "I'm about to leave," he said. "I think it would be best if you left too." The young man sighed. "I can see where you're going to be a difficult case. Probably. Will you turn off the light, please?" He met his date, and immediately put the incident out of his mind. They listened to Brahms's first, and it was everything Westing had hoped it would be. Afterwards, when they were sitting in a bar, he told her about the organization. The girl seemed surprised. It was the second time he had taken her out, and she didn't know him very well. "You ought to belong to something," she said. "Why don't you join?" "You mean that? Everybody should belong to something. You can't be useless." "I'm not useless. I make my contribution, more than most people, in fact." "But you can't just live for yourself." "Why not?" She struggled. "Because you can't," she said. He took her home when the bar closed at midnight. The conversation was one he had engaged in with other girls, but it still depressed him. He hopped the subway and went across the river to Camden, New Jersey, where they were more reasonable about the hours at which bars remain open. The next morning he had a hangover. He was just pouring some tomato juice when someone knocked at his door. "Just a minute," he said. He opened the door. A man in a tweed suit stood in the hall. He had a relaxed, pleasant face, and he smoked a pipe. "Mr. Westing?" "Yes?" "I'm Dr. Cooper. May I come in?" "I didn't ask for a doctor. I could use one, but I haven't called one yet." "Oh? What's your trouble?" "Hangover. I had a rugged night." "Why? What made you do a thing like that?" He shrugged. "It's hard to say." "Insecurity," Dr. Cooper said. "Many people try to evade their insecurities by drinking. Why don't you tell me about it?" He hesitated. "Well," he said, "it's early." Dr. Cooper started forward, and he automatically stepped back to let him in. "Who sent you, anyway?" he asked. "Didn't they tell you I was coming?" "Didn't who tell me you were coming?" "The organization. I'm the head psychologist." "I should have known." "You sound annoyed." "I'm afraid I don't want to join the organization, ever." Dr. Cooper lit his pipe. "I think you should," he said. "It would relieve you of your insecurities. You obviously need to belong to something." "Why?" "It is a natural need in all human organisms. A man by himself is incomplete and unsatisfied. He has no outlet for his energies and his talents." "I have very little energy and no talent." "You're being modest. I understand you have a great deal of both." Cooper looked around the apartment. "Don't you want to belong, Mr. Westing?" "No." "Don't you belong to anything?" "No." "You're sure? You were a political canvasser in the last election, weren't you?" "Yes, but that was different." "Didn't it give you a sense of belonging?" "Yes, but I didn't like it. I felt trapped." "Then why did you do it?" "I'm a citizen. I like to keep my accounts even." "Then you didn't really belong," the doctor said. "Not the way you mean." "This is very interesting. You honestly think you can live without belonging to anything?" "Yes." "Don't you belong to the human race?" "Yes, and I try to keep my dues up, too, but it's more of a strain than a pleasure." Dr. Cooper puffed on his pipe. "I can see where you're going to be a real challenge," he said. "Thank you. I intend to be." "I've got some literature outside. I think you should read it." "You can leave it if you like." "I will." A few more puffs. The psychologist looked extremely serene. "You know, you're a very sick man." "So I've been told." "Why don't you let me cure you?" "First you'll have to convince me I'm sick." "That's true." They talked aimlessly for another half-hour. Cooper left, and Westing looked over the literature. He started to throw it away. Then his conscience twinged. If he was going to fight this thing, he was going to fight it honestly. He would meet their techniques of persuasion, not evade them. He sat down and read all the pamphlets. The need to belong. The sense of unity. Testimonials from members of the organization who have found salvation in its ranks. It was all very well done, and rather weakening to a man with a hangover. He sat for a long time in his apartment, brooding over it. Then he got up and threw all the literature in the trash. "They'll have to do better than that," he said. The next evening, when he got back from work, he found a package in his mail. It was a long-play, high-fidelity calypso record. The notice said it was from Get Acquainted gift from the Jamaican Record Society. After supper, he put the record on. When it had been playing for a while, he got up and, as he often did, began to improvise dance steps to the music. It was great fun, and the record was half over before he noticed the words had been subtly changing. "House built on a rock foundation will not stand. Oh no, oh no. You must join the organization now, 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 now." He snapped off the hi-fi, but the chanting went on in his mind. "You must join the organization. You must join the organization." He put on his coat and went out for a walk. When he got back, he didn't feel like reading, so he turned on the television set. There was a very serious play on. He settled back to watch it. It was about a young man who lived all alone in the city and of his groping toward a better life. "If I could only belong someplace," the young man said to the girl during the second act. "I've never belonged anywhere." "Everybody should belong," the girl said. The young man nodded and groped with his hands. "Or else they'll be like Henry Westing," he mumbled. Mr. Westing got up and turned off the set. He rotated it and looked at the back. It was a little box screwed in one corner. "Very clever," he said. He tore the box off and went to bed. He was just falling asleep when the phone rang. He reached for it in the dark. "Westing speaking?" "Mr. Westing, this is Miss Bale from the organization. We're calling up to see if there are any questions you may have." "I'm afraid I don't. I'm trying to sleep." "So early? I felt like it." "You must be terribly lonely. Why don't you come down to headquarters for cakes and coffee? We're having a good time." "Miss Bale, I've done some canvassing myself. You're doing a good job, but you've got the wrong man." She laughed. It was a very pleasant laugh. "Thank you, Mr. Westing. You sound like the kind of man we need. We've got a big job to do, and there's a place here for you any time you want it." "Doing what?" "Recruiting new members." "Good evening, Miss Bale. I've always tried to be a gentleman. I'd better hang up before I forget myself." He hung up and tried to sleep. The next day an economist came to see him. The day after it was a social scientist, and the day after that a political scientist. He listened patiently for a week as they sat in his apartment and explained the importance of the group to him. "Man is nothing," they said, "unless he belongs to a group." "On the contrary," Mr. Westing said, "the group is nothing unless I belong to it." "That's egotism." "Probably." But he knew he was weakening. He held out with a stubborn feeling he was resisting the tides of history. He felt very brave and strong. There was a one-day lull. He woke up the morning after and heard a sound truck blasting away in the street one floor below. "Henry Westing does not belong. Henry Westing belongs to nothing. Reform Henry Westing. Reform Henry Westing." "Outrageous," he said. He dressed, had breakfast, and started for work. People stood on their doorsteps and stared at him when he stepped onto the sidewalk. He smiled pleasantly at the driver of the truck. "Good morning," he said. "Nice day, isn't it?" The driver nodded sullenly. "Very good," Mr. Westing thought. "You're doing splendidly." At work he was tired and drawn out. He had trouble concentrating. The department manager commented on it. "You're not acting like a company man, Henry." "I'm a little tired. I had a hard night." "What was she like?" "Dismal." Everything was dismal. The jingles ran through his head endlessly. So did the slogans and the words from the sound truck. He was beginning to doubt himself. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps he did need to belong. That night the sound truck was still there. It circled the block, advertising the organization and denouncing Henry Westing. There were signs on all the houses, too. "We belong to the organization," the signs said. There was a sign on every door, except his. He went upstairs and made dinner. Then he sat by the window and tried to think. Down below he could hear the sound truck. "They're getting to you," he thought. "A little more, and they'll have you whipped. You'd better do something." He picked up the phone and dialed. "Yes," a voice answered. "This is Henry Westing." "Ah, Mr. Westing, I thought you'd be calling soon." "You may send your representative over to my apartment this evening. Tell him to bring everything." "Application forms?" "Everything. Whatever you use to close the deal." "He'll be there at 8. "I'll be waiting." At 8 o'clock the young man rang his bell. He was burdened down with equipment. "Come in," Mr. Westing said. "Thank you." "What's all that you're carrying?" "Educational material. Mind if I set it up?" "Go right ahead." He poured himself a brandy and soda and watched. The young man seemed nervous and strained as he set up a hemispherical device which seemed to be a projector. Mr. Westing glanced at a leatherette folder the young man had put aside while he worked. The folder bore a neatly labelled title, Prospects. His heart skipped a beat. He made sure the young man was absorbed in his work. Then he carefully leafed through the book. "This Marlene Harris looks like an interesting case. What's she like?" "Did I leave that there? I'm sorry, I can't let you look at it." "Oh, sorry, I didn't know." The young man took the folder and went back to work. "Do you have a girl?" Mr. Westing asked. "Too busy." "Oh," he sipped his drink. "That Harris girl certainly has been holding out, hasn't she?" "She's a tough one. I've been to see her 6 times. It's funny, too, because she's so lonely." "Really?" "She's too independent. Men don't like her. And she's pretty nice-looking, too. It's a shame she can't act like a woman." "Yes, I guess it is." "There," the young man said. "Now, if you'll just sit down there." "Care for a drink?" "I don't drink." "Not even to be sociable?" "Sociable. Perhaps I should at that." Mr. Westing poured another brandy and soda. There was a great deal more brandy than soda. "You work hard, don't you?" he said. "We're in the middle of a big drive now. This is a very important job." The young man took a drink, the kind a man who has always drunk water takes. "Yes, I guess it is rather important. Organizing, getting things done. A very active life." "That's what I like, activity. I like to live, not just sit around." "Very understandable." The young man took another drink. His face underwent a subtle change. "Let me turn the machine on. We'd better get started." "Did you have dinner yet?" "I've been too busy." "Good, good." "Good?" "Good that you work so hard. Shows character." "Thank you. Now if you'll just sit back there, we'll turn the machine on." The young man seemed to be having trouble focusing his eyes. Westing lit a good cigar and offered his guest one. "To be sociable," he said. "In that case, all right." "You should have another brandy to go with it." He handed him one as he spoke. The young man took it, gulped it down automatically, and turned on the machine. Westing pulled on his cigar and settled back in his chair. He made sure there was another drink by the boy's arm. "Do you know anything about drinking?" "Why, no, I don't." "Three's the custom. 3 drinks and you're friends. You belong." "Then I guess I better." The room turned dark. Stars covered the walls. The young man took another swallow. "To what do you belong?" a deep voice said. "Of what are you a part? In all this vast universe, you alone are nothing. You alone have no meaning, but you as part of something bigger." A sunrise crept along the walls. The colouring was very good, and Mr. Westing enjoyed it immensely. Next to him he heard a low sound. The young man was singing. "It's nice to watch the room spin, isn't it?" Mr. Westing asked. "I was just thinking that. It's beautiful." "I know. Excuse me a minute." He got up and took the phone into the next room. As soon as he was out of earshot, he dialed the number he had memorized earlier. The phone buzzed a few times. "Hello?" a woman answered. "Is this Miss Marlene Harris?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Henry Westing. There's a man here trying to get me to join the organization, and I saw your name and your picture in his prospects book." "Oh, are they after you too?" "They've been after me for a long time. Your picture looks very attractive, Miss Harris." "Thank you." "Do you like music?" "Yes, I do." A few minutes later, he tiptoed into the living room. The film was still playing, the persuasive voice still speaking. Now it was martial music, and there were flags all over, waving, inspiring. "It takes 2, Westing thought. Alone they were getting me, but the 2 of us together will be stronger." He bent over the couch. The boy was asleep and dreaming. His face looked peaceful. Mr. Westing turned on a record. It was an unexpurgated reading of the Arabian Nights. He placed the speaker close to the boy's ear. Then he got dressed and went out to meet Marlene. He had beaten them once again. Maybe they'd get him some day, but way down deep he didn't believe it.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story.
For Service Rendered by J.F. Bone. Originally published in Amazing Stories, April 1963. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Television made Miss Enid Twilley's life endurable by providing the romance which life had withheld. So when the picture tube in her old-fashioned set blew out, it was a major crisis. But Ed Jacqueline's phone didn't ring. The spare 28-inch tube in Jacqueline's TV shop remained undisturbed on the shelf. And the drawn shades of Miss Twilley's living room gave no hint of what was happening behind them. The town of Ellenburg went its suburban way unaware of the crisis in its residential district, which was probably just as well. Frozen with terror, Miss Twilley sat in spastic rigidity, her horrified eyes riveted on the thing in front of her. One moment she had been suffering emphatic pangs of unrequited love with a bosomy TV blonde. The next, she was staring into a rectangular hole of Cimmerian blackness that writhed, twisted, and disgorged a shape that made her tongue cleave to the roof of her mouth and her throat constrict against the scream that fought for release. It wasn't a large shape, but it was enormously impressive despite the lime-green shorts and cloak that partially covered it. It was obviously reptilian. The red skin, with its faint reticulated pattern of ancestral scales, the horns, the lidless eyes, the tapering flexible tail, the sinuous grace and Mephistophelian face
were enough to identify it beyond doubt. Her television set had disgorged the devil. Silence draped the room in smothering folds as Miss Twilly's frozen eyeballs were caught and held for a moment by the devil's limpid green eyes, whose depths swirled for an instant with uncontrolled surprise. The devil looked around the room, at the closed drapes, the dim lights, the shabby furniture, and the plate of cookies and the teapot on the tray beside Miss Twilly's chair. He shook his head. No pentacle, no candles or incense, no altar, no sacrifice, not even a crystal ball, he murmured in an impeccable Savile Row accent. My dear young woman, just how in Eblis's name did you do it? There isn't a single sixth order focus in this room. Do what? Miss Twilly managed to croak. Construct a gateway, the devil said impatiently. A bridge between your world and mine. I didn't, Miss Twilly said. You came crawling out of the picture tube of my TV set. Or what was the picture tube? She amended as her eyes strayed to the rectangle of darkness. The devil turned and eyed the TV curiously, giving Miss Twilly an excellent view of his tail, which protruded through a slit in his cloak. She eyed it with apprehension and distaste. Ah, I see, the devil murmured. A third-ordered electronic communicator transformed to a sixth-order generator by an accidental short circuit. Most interesting. The statistical chances of this happening are about 1.75 to the 25th power, give or take a couple of 100,000. You are an extremely fortunate human. That's not what I would call it, Miss Twilly said. The devil smiled, an act that made him look oddly like Krishna Menon. You are disturbed, he said, but you really needn't keep projecting such raw fear. I have no intention of harming you. Quite the contrary, in fact. Miss Twilly wasn't reassured. Devils with British accents were probably untrustworthy. Why don't you go back to hell, where you came from? She asked pettishly. I wish, the devil said with a shade of annoyance in his beautifully modulated voice, that you would stop using those terminal L's. I am a Devi, not a devil, and my homeworld is hell, not hell. 1 L, not 2. I'm a species, not a spirit. It makes no difference, Miss Twilly said. Either way, you're disconcerting, particularly when you come slithering out of my TV set. It might give your television industry a bad name, the Devi agreed. But there are many of your race who claim the device is an invention of mine. I don't enjoy being frightened, Miss Twilly said coldly. She was rapidly recovering her normal self-possession. And I would have felt much better if you had stayed where you belonged and minded your own business, she finished. But my dear young lady, the Devi protested, I never dreamed that I would frighten you, and besides, you are my business. He smiled gently at the suddenly re-frozen Miss Twilly. I must be dreaming, Miss Twilly thought wildly. This has to be a nightmare. After all, this is the 20th century, and there are no such things as devils. Of course there aren't, the Devi said. I only hope I wake up before I go stark raving mad, Miss Twilly murmured. Now he's answering before I say anything. You're not asleep, he said unreassuringly. I merely read your mind. He grimaced distastefully. And what a mass of fears, inhibitions, repressions, convention, and attitudes it is! It's a good thing for your race that minds like yours are not in the majority. It would be disastrous. Or do you realize you're teetering on the verge of paranoia? You are badly in need of adjustment. I'm not! You're lying! You're the father of lies! She snapped. And liars? He made it sound like lawyers. So I'm told. Nevertheless, I'm telling you the truth. I don't care to be confused with some anthropomorphic figment of your superstitious imagination. I'm as real as you are. I have a name. Liff. just as yours is Enid Twilly. I am the Mardak of Noth, an important entity in my enclave, and I have no intention of seizing you and carrying off to Hale. The Council would take an extremely dim view of such an action. Passing a human permanently across the hyperspatial gap that separates our worlds is a crime, unless consent in writing is obtained prior to such passage. I'll bet. Are you calling me a liar? Liff asked softly. That's a general idea. There's a limit to human insolence, Liff said icily. No wonder some of my colleagues occasionally incinerate members of your race. Miss Twilly choked back the crudity that fluttered on her lips. That's better, Liff said approvingly. You really should practice self-control. It's good for you, and you shouldn't make assumptions based upon incomplete data. Your books that deal with my race are notoriously one-sided. I came through that gateway because you needed my help, and yet you'd chase me off without really knowing whether you want my services or not. I don't want any part of you, Miss Twilly said sincerely. I don't need a thing that you can give me. I'm healthy, fairly well off, and, she was about to say, happy, but changed it quickly to satisfied with things as they are. It wasn't quite a lie. Liff looked at her critically. Permit me to disagree, he said smoothly, but you are wrong on every count. You are neither satisfied, wealthy, nor happy. Frankly, Miss Twilly, you could use a great deal of help. In fact, you need it desperately. I'm 38 years old, Miss Twilly said. That's old enough to recognize a high-pressure sales pitch, and you needn't be so insulting about my appearance. After all, I don't have my makeup on. Liff flinched. I almost hate to do this, he murmured, but you have doubted my honesty. Perhaps it is compensation to hide a feeling of inferiority. Primitive egos are notorious for such acts, but the truth is probably less harmful than permitting you to lie to yourself. Miss Twilly jumped angrily to her feet. How dare you call me a liar? She snapped. She towered over the Devi, her tall, bony body a knobby statue of wrath. Liff's eyes locked with hers. Sit down, he said coldly. And to her surprised consternation, she did. A physical force seemed to flow from him and force her back into the chair. She sat rigidly, seething with a mixture of fear and indignation as Liff picked up his discourse where he had dropped it. You are not satisfied, he said quietly, because you are undernourished, ungainly, and ugly. You would like to be attractive. You wish to be admired. You long to be loved. Yet you are not. That's enough, Miss Tilly snapped. Neither man nor Devi has a right to insult me in my own house. I am not insulting you, Liff said patiently. I am telling you the truth. Now, as for this business of being well off, which I infer means moderately wealthy, you are not. There was a small inheritance from your father, but through mismanagement and inept investments it is today less than $15,000, although it was $50,000 when you received it a few years ago. You are the devil, she gasped. I told you I could read your mind. I'm a telepath. I don't believe you. You found out somehow. You're not thinking, he said. How could I? Now, as for your health, you will be dead in 6 months without my help. You have adenocarcinoma of the pancreas, which has already begun to metastasize. You cannot possibly survive with the present state of medicine your race possesses. Of course, your doctors do have ingenious ways of alleviating the pain, he added comfortingly, like cordoctomy and neurectomy. Miss Twilly didn't recognize the last 2 words, but they sounded unpleasant. She had been worried about her health, but to hear this quiet-voiced death sentence paralyzed her with a cold-crawling terror. It's not true, she gasped. Yet she knew it was. I could make a fortune as a diagnostician for your doctors, Liff said. It's as true as the fact that I'm a Devi from Hale. Actually, my dear Miss Twilly, I had no intention of coming here even though your gateway appeared in my library, but I was intrigued enough to scan through it, and when I saw you at the other end, frightened, diseased, and friendless, I could not help feeling pity for you. You needed my help badly. He sighed. empathy is a device weak point. Naturally, I couldn't refuse your appeal." He shrugged. "At least I have offered to help, and my conscience is clear if you refuse." He wrapped his cloak around him with a movement of his lithe body that was symbolic. The case had been stated. His part was done. "I have nothing more to say," Liff added. "If you do not wish me to stay, I shall leave." He turned toward the TV set. "After I have vanished," he said over his shoulder, "you may turn the set off. The gateway will disappear." He shrugged. "Next time, I'll look for a sabbat or some other normal focal point before I enter a gateway. This has been thoroughly unsatisfying." "Wait," Miss Twilly gasped. He paused. "Have you changed your mind?" "Maybe." "For a human female, that's quite a concession," he said. "But I'm a Devi. I need a more definite answer." "Will you give me 24 hours?" Miss Twilly said. "So you can check my diagnosis?" She nodded. Liff shrugged. "Why not? If your TV holds out that long, I'll give you that much time. Longer if necessary. You can't really be blamed for being a product of your culture, and your culture has rejected the snake. It would be easier if you were a Taoist or a Yazidi." "But I'm not," Miss Twilly said miserably, "and I can't help thinking of you as the enemy." "We Devi get blamed for a lot of things," Liff admitted, "and taken collectively there's some truth in them. We gave you basic knowledge of a number of things such as medicine, writing, law, and the scientific method, but we can't be blamed for the uses to which you have put them." "Are you sure I have cancer?" she interrupted. "Of the pancreas," he said. "And you can cure it?" "Easily. Anyone with a knowledge of fifth-order techniques can manipulate cellular structures. There's very little I can't do, and with proper equipment about the only thing that can't be defeated is death. You've heard, I suppose, of tumours that have disappeared spontaneously?" Miss Twilly nodded. "Most of them are deviant work. Desperate humans sometimes use good sense, find a medium, and generate a sixth-order focus. And occasionally one of us will hear and come." "And the others?" "I don't know," Liff said. "I could guess that some of you can crudely manipulate fifth-order forces, but that would only be a guess." He spread his hands in a gesture of incomprehension, incongruously Gallic. "I don't know why I'm taking all this trouble with you, but I will make a concession to your conditioning. See your doctors, and then, if you want my help, call through the gateway. I'll probably hear you, but if I don't, keep calling." The darkness where the picture tube had been writhed and swirled as it dove into it and vanished. "Phew," Miss Twilly said shakily. "That was an experience." She walked unsteadily toward the TV set. "I'd better turn this off just in case he gets an idea of coming back." "Trust a devil! Hardly." Her hand touched the switch and hesitated. "But perhaps he was telling the truth," she murmured doubtfully. "Maybe I'd better leave it on." She smiled wryly. "Anyway, it's insurance."
"Miss Twilly," the doctor said slowly, "can you take a shock?"
"I've done it before. What's the matter? Don't tell me that I have an adenocarcinoma of the pancreas that'll kill me in 6 months."
The doctor eyed her with startled surprise. "We haven't pinpointed the primary site, but the tests are positive. You do have an adenocarcinoma, and it has involved so many organs that we cannot operate. You have about 6 months left to live."
"My God," Miss Twilly gasped. "He was telling the truth."
"Who was telling?" the doctor began, but he was talking to empty air. Miss Twilly had run from the office. The doctor sighed and shrugged. Probably he shouldn't have told her. One never can tell how these things will work out. She had the diagnosis right, and she looked like a pretty hard customer, but she certainly didn't act like one. Panting with fear, Enid Twilly unlocked the door to her house and dashed into the living room. Thank goodness, she thought with relief. The set was still working. The black tunnel was still there. "Help!" she screamed. "Liff, please, come back!"
The blackness writhed, and the Devi appeared. He was wearing an orange and purple striped outfit this time. Miss Twilly shuddered. "Well?" Liff asked. "You were right," she said faintly. "The doctor says it's cancer. Will you cure me?" "For a price?" Liff said. "But you said—" "I said nothing except that I felt sorry for you and that I would cure you. Even your own doctors charge a fee." "There had to be a catch in it," Miss Twilly said bitterly. "It will be a fair price. It won't be excessive." "My soul?" Miss Twilly whispered. "Your soul? Ha! Just what would I do with your soul? It would be no use to me, assuming that you have one. No, I don't want your soul." "Then what do you want?" "Your body." "So that's it!" Miss Twilly blushed a bright scarlet. With that colour you're not bad looking," Liv said. "Would you want my body right away?" "Of course not. That wouldn't be a fair contract. You should have use of it for a reasonable time on your homeworld, say about 10 years. After that it becomes mine." "How long?" "For the rest of your life." "That doesn't seem quite fair. I'm 38 now. 10 years from now I'll be 48. I'll live perhaps to 80. That gives you over 30 years. "It gives you them too," Liv said. "But your world is alien." "Not entirely. There are quite a few humans on the hill. You have plenty of company." "I can imagine," she said dryly. Liv flinched. "I've told you I do not like those anthropomorphic references to my race." "So you say, but I don't trust you even though you've told me the truth about my body. I won't sell my soul." "I'll put a disclaimer in writing if that will satisfy you," Liv said wearily. "I'm tired of haggling." "But will you obey it?" "With us Devi, a contract is sacred. Even your mythology tells you that much." She nodded. "Of course, I'd want a few more things than health," she said. "I'd want to enjoy these 10 years on Earth." "That is understandable. I'll consider any reasonable request." "Beauty?" "As you humans understand it. Sarcoplasty isn't too difficult." "Wealth?" "That's more difficult and more expensive, but I could perhaps give you 1 month chronograph survey. In that time you could probably arrange to become rich enough to be independent, but I can't guarantee unlimited funds. And besides, you're not worth it." Miss Twilly bridled briefly and then nodded. "That's fair enough, I suppose. And there's one more thing. I want to be happy." "I can do nothing about that. You make or lose your own happiness. I can provide you such tangible things as a healthy body, beauty, and money, but what you do with them is entirely your own affair. No man, or Devi, can guarantee happiness." He paused and looked thoughtfully at a point above Miss Twilly's head. "I could, perhaps, provide you with a talent such as singing or manual dexterity, and even make sufficient adjustments in your inhibition so you could employ your skill. But that is all. Not even I can play Eblis." Miss Twilly's eyes glittered. If he could only do what he said, it would be worth any payment he demanded. She had never been pretty. As a child she had been bony, ungainly, awkward, and ugly. As an adult she had only lost the awkwardness. Boys had never liked her. Men avoided her, and she wanted desperately to be admired. And of course she was about to die. That alone would be reason enough. She was appalled at the thought of dying. At 38 she was too young. Perhaps 30 or 40 years from now the prospect wouldn't be so terrifying, but not now, not when she hadn't lived at all. Life had suddenly become very precious, and its immediate extinction appalled her. She wasn't, she reflected wryly, the stuff from which heroes and martyrs were made, and 10 years were a lot more than 6 months. As far as repayment was concerned, it was a long way off, and Hale was probably not much worse than Ellenberg. "In my opinion, Hale is infinitely better," Liff interjected. "You're prejudiced," Miss Twilly said absently. "Now if she had a figure like say one of those movie actresses, and a face like, and money to go with them. It just might be worth the price. Of course it might not. It could be something like a salt mine, or... It's nothing at all like a salt mine, Liv said. The hours are reasonable, and there's plenty of free time outdoors if you want it. The food isn't the Café Ritz, but it's nourishing, and the life is healthful. After all, we Devi aren't savages. I wonder, she said thoughtfully. Now if I could, say a gold lame sheath dress, and perhaps in a bikini. Women, Liv sighed and gave up. Why should he bother about listening the disadvantage? She hadn't been listening to the advantages. What are you stopping for? Miss Twilly demanded. I'm listening. There are a few other things, such as free medical care, splendid recreation facilities, and conducted tours of hell. And the disadvantages? Very few. There's no pay, of course, and you will be required to devote a certain amount of time to my service. On the whole, employment on Hale isn't much different than here, except that it's a bit more enlightened. Like slavery? Miss Twilly smiled unpleasantly. You're not dealing with a fool. The concept of freedom is a relative thing, Liv said, and who among us, either Devi or human, is truly free? And what is the essential difference between being a slave to society and a slave to an individual? We Devi don't have such a high regard for physical liberty, obviously. But as long as you do your work, there's no interference with your outside activities. You can think and read as you please. We supply our help with a very complete library, and keep it up to date. Is that so? Liv paled to a dull pink. I wish you'd stop mentally dredging those old lies about fire and brimstone. They're embarrassing. It's been quite a few thousand years since a Devi has derived any satisfaction from sadism. We removed that particular trait from our race. You won't be overworked or cruelly treated, and you won't be beaten or subjected to physical torture. Since I have no knowledge of what you might consider mental torture, I couldn't say whether there would be any or not. I think not, since no other human has complained of being mentally misused, but I can't tell. Why can't you? You can read my mind. Only your thoughts, not your emotions or attitudes. Miss Twilly shrugged. It sounds fair enough, but 20 or 30 years for 10 is a high price. You fail to consider the costs involved. Your physical rehabilitation will be expensive, and your financial even more so. I'll have to employ the time study enclave to predict a financial plan for you, and chronography isn't cheap. Why can't you just give me the money? Liv shrugged. I don't have it, and I couldn't supply you with gold. It would be suspicious, and we try to avoid attracting attention to our clients or ourselves. Humans have some rather messy ways of abrogating a fellow human's contract. So you acquire your wealth within the framework of your society, through the stock market in your case. Oh, I see. Your money is enough to start you off. I'll show you how to make it multiply. And if I cheat you? Miss Twilly asked. You won't. I'm not utterly naive. There is a security clause in the contract which must be fulfilled. And what is that? I put my mark on you. That makes you a permanent sixth-order focus I can contact at any time. That gives you quite an advantage. Have you ever read any contracts on your own world? I'm not asking for a thing more than your grantors do. In fact, not as much. Read a mortgage sometime if you don't believe me. Liv eyed her with mild reproof. Think, he said, when, even in your perverted mythology, has one of my race failed to live up to his end of an agreement? Who has done the cheating? Who attempts to break contracts? Your whole history is filled with specious promises, broken words, and outright falsehood. Just why do you think we had to make contracts in the first place? Because you humans cheated at every opportunity, and you still do. That's why we must have guarantees. We go to all the expense, take all the risk, and then run the added risk of being double-crossed. That's too much. But our souls are beyond price. I already told you that I care nothing for your soul. It's useless to me. He frowned. "We've had to fight that canard for centuries. We Devi are practical folk, not starry-eyed idealists. We deal in real property, not in intangibles. Now stop quibbling and make up your mind. You've heard the concessions. After all, there is a limit to altruism. Now, if you don't want to deal, say so, and I'll leave. It will be no skin off my tail if you don't accept." Liv Hant turned toward the TV set. "I haven't said I wouldn't," Miss Twilly said. "Nor have you said you would. Now speak up. My time is valuable." "Oh, very well," Miss Twilly said sulkily. "I accept." Liv smiled, reached under his cloak, and produced a long sheet of paper covered with writing. "You're a hard bargainer, Miss Twilly," he said. "You extracted every condition you could possibly get on a deal of this kind. My congratulations. This is a personal contract I had drawn up. It's in English so you can understand it. All you do is sign both copies. In transactions like this, no witnesses are necessary." "You don't mind if I read it first?" Miss Twilly said. "Not that I don't trust you, but this is business." "Not at all," Liv said, "and please note the escape clause which allows you a preemptory withdrawal if you are not satisfied with the basic services." Miss Twilly eyed the paper, skipping over the legal jargon, but carefully reading the specific provisions. It was deceptively simple and completely binding, but it didn't vary from Liv's proposals. She would have 10 years of health, wealth and beauty, in return for which she would surrender her body to Liv, Mardak of Noth, to employ as he saw fit, within certain limits provided by the exceptions. She sighed. It was fair enough, she supposed. There were a few exceptions like the suicide clause that allowed Liv to take immediate possession if she tried to kill herself, and the war clause which permitted him to remove her to a safe place for the duration of the conflict. She shrugged. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with it except the tone. Somehow it managed to convey the impression of a property rather than a personal transaction. "It's always best to keep these things impersonal," the device said. "You sign on the bottom line underneath my cartouche." Miss Twilly signed. "And now," Liv said briskly, "there are a few formalities. Not that I don't trust you, of course, but business is business. Will you please disrobe?" "Must I?" Liv nodded. "You must. I realize that this is embarrassing for you, but it would be infinitely more embarrassing if I placed my mark upon you while you were clothed." Miss Twilly shivered a little as she reached for the zipper of her skirt, but she had expected something like this. Liv looked at her critically. "You're worse than I thought," he said. "However, your skeleton seems structurally sound and well-proportioned. Now please turn around." Miss Twilly had hardly turned her back when a lance of numbing cold struck her in the base of the spine. She jumped involuntarily as Liv's voice came to her ears. "There, that does it." He walked past her and turned off the TV. The black hole winked out, leaving a shattered picture tube where it had been. "Now that you're a sixth-order focal point, we can dispense with this monstrosity," he said. "The automatics on here will generate a new gateway shortly." "Now what?" Miss Twilly asked. She wasn't sure that she liked the idea of being a sixth-order focus. "The mark leaves a small red lesion," Liv said, "but it won't bother you. However, I should warn you not to attempt to have it removed. That could be quite painful and perhaps fatal." He moved in front of her. "I expect that we'd better start therapy right away. That tumour isn't going to be easy to remove." His eyes were level with her own, twin pools of clear, bottomless green, with the darker spots of his pupils sharply demarcated from the surrounding iris. With mild surprise she realized that they were oval rather than round, and their ellipses were growing and encompassing her in their inner darkness. Liv eyed her solicitously from a chair next to her bed. There was a faint proprietary glint in his eyes, but his voice was as soft as ever. "It's all done, Enid," he said. "How do you like it?" Miss Twilly didn't like the use of her first name. It sounded entirely too familiar, but she supposed that there were little she could do about it. After all, he did have certain rights, even though their full exercise was some years hence. She stirred sleepily. She was in her own bedroom, and the bed that she had slept in these past 18 years was familiar and comforting. Except for the divi sitting beside her, everything was normal, down to the last fold of the flannel nightgown that covered her. She felt oddly alive, and somehow different. There was a fullness to her body, and a heaviness to her chest. She looked down, and gasped with surprise and pleasure at the jutting rise of the nightgown. She had changed. That was the biggest part of the specifications, Liv said, with the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. Your mental patterns were extraordinarily precise about some things. About others, I had to use my own judgment. I hope the overall effect meets with your approval. Miss Twilly felt as excited as an adolescent on her first date. She slipped out of bed and padded on bare feet over to the vanity in the corner. Eagerly she eyed herself in the big mirror. Even in the nightgown she looked good. Her face was still her own, but it had been subtly changed, the features smoothed and rearranged. Her pale blue eyes were now a smoky grey, and her plain mouse-brown hair had reddish glints in it, and was much thicker than before. It was a very satisfactory face, smooth and beautiful, and years younger. Why, she looked barely 25. With a quick movement she bent, grasped the hem of a gown, and pulled it over her head, and gasped. She had never dreamed of looking like this, even in her wildest flights of fancy. "Like it?" Liv asked from his seat in the corner. "Like it?" she chortled. "I adore it! How on earth did you do it? You've not only made me beautiful, you've made me young." "I didn't do it on Earth," Liv admitted. "I took you to Hell, where there's some decent equipment. It wasn't much," he added vaguely, "merely the application of some rather simple cellular biology, mostly a rearrangement of DNA molecules and a bit of sarcoplasty. Actually, it wasn't too difficult. The removal of your tumour was much harder. You'll find that 2 weeks have gone from your life, but they've been well spent." "I should say they have," Miss Twilly said as she pirouetted slowly before the glass. Her brows knit in a tiny frown as she saw her only blemish, a bright red spot at the base of her spine. "The mark can't be helped," Liv said, "but it doesn't detract at all, and it won't show even in a bikini." 40, 24, 36, Miss Twilly breathed. "Liv, I could kiss you." "I'd rather you wouldn't," Liv said. "There is, after all, a certain species incompatibility between yours and mine. Incidentally, you have perfect health. You'll never know a sick day for the rest of your life, which should be quite long. And I gave you a fine singing voice, and a mental attitude that will let you use it." "Thank you," Miss Twilly murmured as she stared at her reflection. "I've left instructions for your financial operations on your dresser. Follow them, and you'll be financially independent. I think that does it. Everything is satisfactory, I trust?" "Completely," Miss Twilly breathed, never removing her eyes from the mirror. "Then I shall be leaving." Miss Twilly drew in a deep breath and observed the results with utter fascination. "Don't you think I'm beautiful?" she asked. Liv smiled. "Different worlds, different standards," he said. "Beautiful isn't quite the word I would use." "What word would you use?" "Useful," Liv said. "Useful? What do you mean?" "It should be obvious," Liv said. "But I suppose it isn't. You humans are a strange lot. You assume, you don't reason, and it always shocks you to find that your assumptions are wrong." Miss Twilly looked at him with wide eyes. A cold chill ran down her spine and poked tingling rootlets of ice into her viscera. "What have I assumed?" "Do I have to answer that?" Miss Twilly blushed. The effect was far more startling this time. Liv smiled with an air that would have been infuriating in a human, but was somehow appropriate for a divi. Miss Twilly sighed. At least that worry was removed. "Perhaps I should give you a short synopsis of deviant society," Liv said. "It's not like yours. Millennia ago, our culture and technology evolved to the point where individual needs could be satisfied effortlessly. As a result, we were compelled to consider group desires. Modern society on Hale is composed of enclaves with a community of interest, plus certain ancillary groups that support them. The task of satisfying the desires of the enclave is infinitely more complex than satisfying an individual, which gives our civilization the necessary stimulus to progress. One of the reasons we deal with your world is to provide us with things impractical to produce upon our own. Another reason is amusement. If only you humans were not so savage, we could perhaps arrange tours of Earth to observe you in your native haunts." "Is that why?" Miss Twilly began. He shook his head. "No. The importation of humans for ethnological studies has long since become a matter of interest only to highly specialized enclaves. That subject has been exhausted for popular satisfaction. We have tried to import other species, but they do not thrive on Hale, and it takes a great deal of trouble merely to keep them alive. However, your race adapts so readily that even your cultural variations disappear in a few decades. It was this early importation and your ability to survive that has placed your race in such demand. It is unfortunate, perhaps, that your species cannot reproduce on our world, but the inhibitors we use to regulate our numbers also affect yours. Naturally, we can't risk a population explosion merely to reproduce your race, so we obtain more of you when necessary." "Why?" "Consider for a moment what might be valuable in a civilization that has no basic needs." "Luxuries?" "Precisely. As an ancillary system operator, I supply a luxury item to my fellow citizens, one that cannot be readily produced by our techniques. I said I was a Mardak, but you never asked what it meant. You assumed it was a title. It is, but it is professional, not social. There are no classes on Hale, merely occupations." "All right," Miss Twilly said reluctantly. "What is a Mardak?" "The closest analogy in your society," Liv said, "is a dairyman." The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Once Upon a Monbeast by Charles E. Fritch. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, March 1952. Narrated by Tom Trussel. That's not my real name up there, and in a little while you'll discover the reason why. If you read my real name attached to this, you'd think it was just another fantastic yarn I batted out, and then you'd forget it. And you'd laugh. You'd probably laugh anyway, for a while. But I've got to get this thing off my chest once and for all. I was a struggling science fiction author at the time it began, or rather, just before it began. Nope, that's not right. Struggling isn't the word. It doesn't express the blood, sweat, and postage stamps that went into a creation, the hope and the futility that ran hot and cold with each morning's mail, the psychological and financial insecurity that comes to a beginner crazy enough to tackle such a field. And then, to top it off, I got a letter from Donald MacDonald. That's not his real name either, and in a little while you'll find out the reason why. He's one of the all-time greats in science fiction, and still is, and a fan not knowing his work would be suspected of having lost his marbles. So a name author writes me a letter. Great, huh? No. I'd sent MacDonald a batch of my manuscripts, humbling asking the great man to favour them with a glance if a moment ever came while he was resting a bit between dashing off novelettes. And would he kindly let me know, frankly, honestly, without fear of injuring my delicate feelings, what he thought of the work? He would.
and did. The letter read, "Dear Mr. I appreciate your efforts at trying to crack the SF field, but I'm afraid I'll have to disillusion you. I have read your manuscripts with considerable care, and I'm sorry to report that you seem to have no talent for writing, and especially none for science fiction. I would suggest you turn your energies to something else. Saxophone playing, stamp collecting, anything else. If you insist upon writing, however, have you considered fillers? Best wishes, Donald MacDonald." What I should have done was go out into the country and let the gathering steam blow its lid, but I didn't. If I'd gotten an automobile in motion, I would have run down the nearest Boy Scout just to see his blood spatter. Instead, I sat down and wrote a letter to Mr. Donald MacDonald. It was a fine letter, full of colourful phrases and split infinitives. To hell with grammar at a time like that, I rationalized. I told him in no uncertain terms just what I thought of him and his criticisms. I'd be a science fiction writer just to show him up for the incompetent he was, I said. I guess I said a lot of things. It was a letter full of more than fire and brimstone. It was radioactive. I mailed it. Then I had a beer. 2 days later, while I was bravely punching typewriter keys in a desperate effort to make good my boast, a small, haggard-looking fellow came to the door and rang the bell. "We don't want any," I said. He peered through the screen door and said, "I'm MacDonald," in a nervous, uncertain voice. "MacDonald who?" "Donald MacDonald. May I come in?" "You're kidding." "No, by God, you're not. You are Donald MacDonald." He smiled wanly. "May I come in? I flew all the way." "Just to see me?" It was no trouble. I took a skyry." "A what? May I come in?" Sure, come on in. Have a chair. Drink?" "No, thanks," he said, seating himself. "I'm afraid I've been... That is, no, I don't believe so." "I got your letter," I said, suddenly remembering. My awe at the presence of the great man was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of, now, what the hell does he want? "And I got yours," MacDonald said. "That's why I'm here." He gazed at my typewriter as though it were ready to bite him. "You didn't take my advice?" "Hardly," I said, rather flippantly. "Once the bug has bitten you." "Have you had anything accepted?" I stared at the rug, hating the man for asking. "No, not yet," I admitted grudgingly, "but—" "Then the bug hasn't really bitten you yet," he said. "You'll know it when it does." I guess my letter was a bit, abrupt," I said, not knowing how else to fill the silence. "You were pretty mad," he admitted, "and I don't blame you. I should have known better than to tell you that way. But in this game, you've got to learn to take criticism. If your work's bad, admit it and throw in the towel." "And mine's bad?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I'm afraid so." But the steam had been released and the period of mourning had ended. So, "I'll improve," I told him. "You're wasting your time." "Possibly. What I can't understand, though, is why a big name in science fiction comes way the devil out here just to advise me to stop knocking my head against a wall." "Perhaps more than your head is at stake," he said. "What?" "Nothing," he said hastily. For a moment his pale face held a haunted look, and he rose, looking like a man unsure of himself. "I can't talk you out of it, so I'd better go." "Wait a minute. Just what did you mean by that other remark?" Donald MacDonald glanced around him as though he were afraid invisible beings might be eavesdropping. You really want to know the reason why?" I nodded. "Your work is good," he said seriously. "Too good. Not up to par on some points, but in a few years you'll be going places. That's why I sneaked away from them and came here, to beg you to reconsider, to stop this writing now before it's too late." "You mean? You can't mean. You're not afraid of competition?" He waved an annoyed hand. "Competition? Hell! There's always room for more. You don't understand," he went on, screwing his face into a look of determination. "I'm trying to save your peace of mind, your sanity perhaps. The mind is a great and powerful thing, sometimes dangerous. All these things, these alien creatures that a science fiction author creates." "Yes?" But he had straightened suddenly, a look of terror on a face gone ashen. He went to the door like a man being pushed, fumbled for the knob. "I beg of you, for your sake, forget it," he called back. Then he was gone. I went out on the porch, but MacDonald's was not in sight. I heard a strange noise as of the flapping of great leathery wings. A shadow passed across the lawn. I looked up. Nothing. The next morning I got a small envelope in the mail. The letter inside read, "Enclosed is a cheque for your story, The Monbeast." I sank into the softest chair in the world and read those wonderful, wonderful words, and held the cheque in my hand and read those wonderful, wonderful figures. I was so in a trance I hardly noticed the tiny decimal point that scampered on tiny legs across the cheque. I hardly felt the small sharp bite, but my first acceptance! It was incredible, the exhilaration that flowed through me in that instant. It was like a much-needed shot of adrenaline, like cool spring water to a thirsty man. I had a cheque for a story someone thought enough of to publish. I was an author. A real, live, honest-to-goodness author, with a cheque in my hand to prove to a critical world that I wasn't a bum after all. Suddenly, the world was a big, wide, wonderful place to live in, and I loved everyone in it. Even the poor, disillusioned Donald MacDonald. But why stop here? I thought. There were more cheques where that came from. If I could sell one story, I could sell 2, and then 3, and 4. So I did. In a way, it was something like digging my own grave. You don't understand that now, but in a little while you'll see the reason why. After I had haunted the newsstand for about 3 months, the great day came. The Monbeast was the last story in the magazine. At the time I thought they really should have featured it, and my name was misspelled on the contents page, but it was a great day just the same. A day of triumph, a day for rejoicing, and I had several stories accepted during the several months' interval. But this was the day that the fruits of my labour became evident to the world. I walked home with a proud, firm step, casually displaying the magazine to the vast public eye, to friend and foe alike. I tried to act nonchalant, as though this were old stuff to an established writer like me. It was a day of glory, of triumph, rivaling Caesar's victorious march into Rome. That evening I read the story over and over again, marvelling at the perfection of its form, savouring the exquisite flavour of each delicate, richly hued word, the uniqueness of each choice, well-turned phrase. I fell asleep with the magazine in my hand. The next morning the Monbeast was sitting at the foot of my bed. Okay, it said, blinking its bug eyes at me. Don't act so surprised. MacDonald warned you, didn't he? But,
Sure, I'm real, the Monbeast volunteered, scratching its scaly head with a long-nailed finger. That's the trouble with you guys. You're full of imagination, but you can't face reality. Where do you come from? The Monbeast shrugged massive green shoulders. The whole thing's much too technical for me to worry about. All I know is us BEMs exist, and we get to your dimension via science fiction. That power of mind MacDonald was talking about? I said, shuddering a bit. Something like that. Other forms of fiction deal with things native to your world. Science fiction regards us BEMs as real, so while we don't ordinarily exist here, there's a stress created in the barrier between us, and we come through. Then you're really real? Practically. Right now, though, you're the only one who can see and hear me. You haven't characterized me sufficiently so that the readers will be convinced that I'm real. But that's okay. You'll improve. Thanks. But now what about you? I said, trying to not appear over-anxious. Are you returning to your own dimension, or are you staying here for a while? The Monbeast grinned, showing the 80 sharp-pointed teeth I knew it possessed. Sorry, I'm here to stay. I'm your brainchild, you know, so I'll have to stick to you. I gulped. Stick to me? Only figuratively, the Monbeast said, but I'll be around. He cocked a bug eye at me and said gravely, We'd better get a few things straight right from the start. One of them is that as far as you're concerned, I'm as real as that bedpost. Real? I tried to laugh that off, but the sound came out a little weakly. That's silly. You're just a product of my imagination. Am I? The Monbeast said. He thrust the scaly face close to mine and yawned. Suddenly the room became a Turkish bath. Okay, I said. Turn it off. Coolness came, and I breathed easier as the steam dissipated. Secondly, you're going to create bigger and better BEMs, and make them more convincing, the Monbeast continued. With all you writers turning us loose, we can have a swell time in this world. But how can you? I protested. You said the readers wouldn't believe in you, so you don't exist for them. Science fiction is growing, the Monbeast said. Every day more people are getting to realize that there is more to the world than those things they see around them. They believe what they read in love stories and detective stories. Science fiction is next. Suppose I don't want to create more BEMs, I said. Suppose I take up saxophone playing or something and leave science fiction alone. You can't stop writing it now, any more than a true fan can stop reading it. The bug has bitten you. He smiled a piano keyboard of teeth and continued. Besides, I could be obliged to inspire you just a bit, but you just work along with me and we'll both do fine. So we did. The Monbeast isn't such a bad fellow after all, once you get to know him. Neither are the other BEMs hanging around my house. Oh yes, there are others, lots of them, hanging from the rafters, under chairs, in coffee cups, everywhere. It's an occupational hazard, you know. Chances are, though, you wouldn't be able to see them, unless you're a real gone science fiction fan, and even then, maybe not. But someday you will. Someday you'll be sitting in your favourite chair reading your favourite science fiction magazine, and you'll look up. Maybe it'll be sitting on the desk beside you, running one of 4 hands through a nest of snakes on its scaly head. Maybe it'll be only an inch tall and perched on the piano watching you. Maybe at first it'll be just a warm, dank breath on the back of your neck. No telling when it'll be either. Maybe next year, next month, tomorrow. Who knows? Perhaps even now. Here's a little tip. When you lay down this magazine, turn around slowly. Have you ever had the feeling that something was going on behind your back, but when you turned around, you saw nothing? What's that? You think maybe you've got that feeling right now? Listen, on second thought, now that you know, maybe you'd better not turn around. Take this as a gag, a nice big laugh. You'll be a lot better off that way. What you don't know can't hurt you. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Pogo Planet by Donald A. Wollheim, writing as Martin Pearson. Originally published in Future combined with Science Fiction, October 1941. Narrated by Tom Trussel. As my ship hit the darkness that was the outer atmosphere of mid-planet, I thrilled to the thought that I, Ajax Calkins, had at last achieved my rightful place among the pioneers of space. Even when my ship bounced on the green soil, flew end over end upwards to come down kaplunk in the wrong side of a gooey thick swamp, I exulted that I was the first in possession of a major planet that had been overlooked by the rest of the interplanetary crowd. As I picked myself up from the midst of a pile of miscellaneous equipment, hiking ropes, elephant guns, para-rays, spare shoes, and cans of uni-food, and rubbed my bruised arms and head, I thought of how many millions would give their all to be in my place. Mid-planet. How the whole system had thrilled when its discovery was finally determined last year. For decades, science had known there was a planet between Saturn and Uranus, ever since Pickering had proved the perturbations of those planets' orbits pointed to a body between them. Yet telescopes had always failed to detect it. Few had taken it seriously, yet it was there. It was discovered finally by electromagnetic induction coils at the Mars Prime Observatory. It was rechecked from Flagstaff and searched for by Tycho I. The latter could not see it. It was still invisible, a strangely dark world. It was then that I conceived my great idea. For years I had secretly nourished my grievance against the world into which I found myself born. All the great heroic acts had been done. The major planets pioneered. Gretelspoon had at last opened up Pluto, and there was nothing left for me to do to show that I too was made of godlike stuff. But mid-planet, there was my chance. Hastily I outfitted a small spaceship with all that I would need. Hastily but craftily I had the orbits charted and the controls processed. My destiny was always certain, for had it not been my destiny to come into a large fortune early in life? Surely this had been ordained. Then I had hurtled through space toward mid-planet alone, secretly. The world would not know of my triumph until I returned to tell them and receive their adoring plaudits. Months went past while I endured the hardships of space sickness, the cosmitch, and voidal ague. At last mid-planet loomed dark in the celestial panorama. Still it cast no light, still it was a black orb sailing silently on its mighty orbit, unattended by any moon. Finding that my ship was irrevocably destined to hit the planet, I determined to land rather than turn back. So it came about that I plunged down through the darkness and found, to my amazement, that after several 100 yards of opaque gaseous envelope, I emerged into brilliant blue sky and rapidly approached the green surface. After the crash, and after I had picked myself up and rubbed arnica on my black and blue spots, the problem of the dark planet turned light demanded my attention. I realized that some strange gas or mixture of gases chanced to make up the outermost strata of the atmosphere of mid-planet, a gaseous compound that absorbed light one way but would not pass it once it had struck the surface of the planet, so that above the planet remained swathed in lightless mystery, while below the sky seemed to radiate blue, and the lighting and warmth was held in to appear as a beautiful spring day on earth. This, then, had been the circumstance which had kept mid-planet veiled from the sight of man, until I, Ajax Calkins, tore aside the veil. I felt a glow of warmth suffuse my body with pride for this accomplishment. Buckling a para-ray to my belt, for I did not think heavier weapons were necessary in this peaceful-looking scene, I stepped to the door of the ship and forced it open. At my feet the swamp oozed and gurgled. A scant distance away the bank of solid ground lay. I leaped the distance, and I am proud to say misjudged it by a mere foot or so. Dragging myself out of the thick gummy mess, I clambered to the bank of the strangely greenish soil, placed 1 foot forward, scowled, and raised my right hand. I hereby take possession of this land in my name, Ajax Calkins, and proclaim it subject to my will as Emperor. This I pronounced with firm dignity becoming a Magellan or a Cortez. You may seem surprised that I should make myself ruler of this land and not merely annex it to the Interplanetary Union. Why should that surprise you? Was it not mine by right of priority? And how, indeed, do you think kingdoms and empires are won? I am not a modest man. I have always said that I am a man of great destiny. Why should I bow to traditions? Having satisfied my will, I looked about. Before me stretched a long rolling plain, green as if covered with fields of grass. Yet it was not grass, but a curious green hard clay that seemed to make up the soil. Far to the distance, low hills rose. The oddest feature of the soil was the fact that it was interminably interlaced with deep, sharp cracks, like a clay that had been baked improperly and cracked all over. It seemed to me that there was a strange discoloration far off in the base of the hills, from which white and grey plumes of vapour arose, as if marking the factories of some hillside city. A city it could well prove to be, and if that were so, then I had found a capital and subjects. I set out to walk the several miles to the hills. I had sufficient equipment for such a reconnoitre already on me. The going was not easy. The ground was flat and hard enough to walk on, but the deep cracks and narrow crevices which one constantly came across made the trip difficult. I would have to leap perilously over the more narrow cracks, or else carefully find a way around the wider ones. It seemed to me that it would be difficult to make roads across such a terrain. The bridges would be innumerable. I wondered how the natives got around. I had seen no sign of animals as yet, but that was not to be considered surprising if there were a city so near. There were plants, a large number scattered here and there in clumps, reddish and greenish masses somewhat like the vegetation of our American western deserts. After walking and jumping, and still more walking and leaping, I became tired after about an hour. The city was still a distance away, but it could now be seen with greater distinctness. It was indeed what I had thought, a cluster of buildings obviously constructed for intelligent beings, and there were indeed columns of smoke rising from them. More than that, I could not distinguish. I had come across no roads as yet, which was odd, if this were a city through comprehensible considering the nature of the ground. At last I saw a building of some sort in my path. It was a small structure, hardly more than a framework construction of clay. I made my way to it and looked at it. The building itself was nothing, just a framework, as I had said. It was what was propped up beside it that puzzled and amazed me. It was a 9-foot cylinder of shining metal. About the middle of this metal shaft was fixed a circular frame. There were a number of what might be controls set in the cylinder just above this central railwork, and a large mass like a donut running underneath the metal hoop which might have held an engine of some sort. The bottom of the shaft was capped by a large rubbery mass. I could not figure out what this was. I stood it upright, for it was not too heavy, and looked at it from all directions. It was a puzzle. Then I climbed onto the hoop affixed to its middle and sat down. The central shaft ran between my legs, the engine was under me, and the controls faced me. It occurred to me that here was a machine designed to be operated by someone in my position and of my general size. Because I am afraid of nothing, I touched the controls and pressed them. Below me there was a sort of murmuring and rumbling. Then the cylinder seemed to vibrate slightly, to grow more tense. I grasped the metal bar tightly. There was a terrifying hiss, and then a terrific crash, and the cylinder suddenly hurtled into the air. I held on for dear life, my composure dreadfully shaken. The whole machine bounced upwards into the air, and then came down on its rubber-capped bottom. I held on. It hit. A shaft within the cylinder contracted and absorbed the shock, and suddenly flicked out again, and up we went. As I grasped the main tube for dear life, I realized what it was. A pogo stick. A giant, mechanically controlled, powered pogo stick. Up and down, jarring and violent, down and up. I was dizzy and ill and didn't know how to stop it. It was progressing madly in the general direction of the city. I pushed buttons wildly when I wasn't holding on for dear life, but I didn't seem to get the right combination. The stick would hurtle wildly forward into the air many dozens of feet, then come down to hit the earth with a shock, contract, and then recoil violently again and up with a sickening jolt into the air again. I saw that it was a means for travel over terrain impassable because of its crevices and cracks to wheeled vehicles or beings on foot. I saw this as the unguided power pogo came down directly into a narrow crack. The capped bottom slid between the sides. The engine box hit the sides of the narrow cleft hard. There was a terrific kick, and the shaft hit out again futilely in the airy emptiness of the depth below it, and I went sailing out head over heels to land several yards away in the midst of a band of mid-planetarians. The next thing I knew, I was being pinned down by a number of grey fuzzy arms, while a kangaroo looked down at me and questioned me in a squeaky language. At least it looked like a kangaroo, for it had the giant legs and the long powerful tail of one. It had upstanding mousy ears, a pointed rodent-like face, and a mammalian body covered with short grey-brown hair. Around its waist was strapped a belt-like harness, from which several pouches were slung. In one hand it held a weapon, like a sort of combination of pistol and slingshot. Naturally, I did not answer its questions. It, the chief kangaroo man, shrugged its shoulders and motioned to its fellows who were holding me down. They allowed me to get to my feet when I was surprised to find that I was still all in one piece, and that they had not touched my equipment, including my para-ray. A little distance away was standing a simply gigantic power pogo, towering a couple of dozen feet high, with a large circular platform set around its middle. Facing that, they started to walk towards there. Started, I say, for they walked in kangaroo leaps, and I simply fell when they tried to make me do the same. They picked me up bodily and bounded over and up to the platform. There they held on to straps attached to the main cylinder and waited. I think I must have fainted, because I have no recollection of the trip outside of a nightmare of terrible leaps and falls. When I came to again, it was in the city by the hills. Several of the creatures were standing around me trying to question me in their odd language, and, of course, making no headway. I felt that this was not the time to inform them of my imperial accession. I was not sure that they were the most fitting inhabitants of this world to receive that honour. There might be other intelligent races inhabiting the same planet, even as they are on Venus. Accordingly, I kept my mouth shut and stared them down. That was a feat of which I could be proud, considering the odd nature of their eyes and faces. Finally, they led me away in short bounds to a building and up a ramp to a room. There they thrust me and closed the door. The room was large, partly open to the interior patio, but it had another inhabitant, a girl. She was standing by the open semi-balcony staring into the courtyard. When I exclaimed, she turned sharply and looked at me. She was dressed surprisingly like an Earth girl. She looked very much like the Earth type. I congratulated myself on having picked for my empire a planet which held a race so similar to my own. But my hopes were dashed 2 seconds later when she opened her mouth and said in perfect English, "Hello, stranger. How did you get to mid-planet so soon?" I recovered my composure and introduced myself modestly, not telling her of the position I had taken upon myself. "And who are you?" I asked. "Oh, I'm Nadia Landor, and I came with the official IU expedition. Our ship is about 30 miles away, and I came here on a geological survey in a single-seater flyer. I stopped to say hello, but our hosts don't seem to know the meaning of the word." "Oh," I said, and fell silent. What was I to say? I had been so certain that I could get to mid-planet first, and now it seemed that the Union had beaten me out again. Then I squared my shoulders. This was no way for Ajax Calkins, Emperor of at least half mid-planet, to act. My destiny would see me through. "You need have no fear," I said. "I will find a way for us to escape." She looked at me oddly and smiled. "Oh, that's all settled. We'll escape immediately if you want to. I've fixed things with our buggy friend." "With whom?" I gasped. "Why, haven't you seen the buggers yet? Look, there's Bosco in the yard." She beckoned to the inner courtyard. I went over to her side and looked. In the courtyard, standing just below us, stood a monstrous insect, a thing somewhat larger than a horse, a big, squat, compact-looking, broad-backed creature. For a moment I stared at it without comprehension, and then suddenly its appearance struck a responsive chord in my brain. It was a flea, a gigantic flea. "Isn't he cute?" murmured Nadia. "He's agreed to help us escape." "He's what? Do you mean to say he's—" I started. "Intelligent," she finished. "Yes, the buggers have a rather high intelligence, not as good as our kangaroo friends, but nonetheless clever. The fleas are a sort of semi-barbarian group inhabiting a section about 1,000 miles away. This fellow, whom I call Bosco, was captured and doesn't like the idea of making a banquet for some kangaroo holiday. I goggled at the creature, and it stared with an interested flicker of its feelers at me. "I'm glad you still have your para-ray. It was all that I was missing. Come on, let's go now." Nadia suited her actions to her words by vaulting the stone balustrade and landing astride the monster bug's back. I gingerly followed her and seated myself in front. "Now what?" I said, for I didn't know how this was going to help us escape. "Hold tight and use your ray when the guard appears," she said, and then screamed at the top of her lungs. I was nearly paralyzed myself with the sound, but the guard who opened the gate was more so, and I beamed him nicely. Bosco seemed to sink lower, and then his monstrously powerful legs smashed down, and we made the most colossal bound I have ever dreamed of. That super flea must have covered at least 300 yards with that first bound, and he must have made 200 at least with every subsequent bounce. We held on for dear life, and the air whished past us like mad. Behind us, the city of kangaroos sprang to life as they saw their assorted prisoners escaping, and very soon I saw over my shoulder that a line of gigantic steam-powered pogos were bounding along after us, each manned by several armed creatures. The flea was fast, but the pogos, powered by terrific steam boilers, were equally so. And thus we raced across the clay-creviced terrain, 2 humans on the back of a flea colossus, followed by a single-file line of puffing steel pogos, their plumes of smoke leaving a trail behind them. I turned and tried to pick off the riders with my ray, but it was hopeless, so violently was everything going up and down. I gave up and clung for dear life to the hard neck of our steed. But it seemed to be impossible to shake off our followers. They remained fast on our trail, and after a while I realized that Bosco was tiring out. His leaps were not so high or far. "What shall we do?" called Nadia to me. "We can't shake them." It was then that the idea occurred to me that saved us. We were already very close to where my spaceship had landed, and I succeeded to conveying in signals what I had in mind for our quite intelligent flea. On we went, and when we came to the side of the swamp in which my ship had landed, Bosco gave a terrific leap which must have well set a record for all mid-planet, and sailed fully 500 yards across the swamp to land exhausted on the other side. But the pogos could not make that great leap, nor could the giant things stop so easily. On they rushed, and one after another they landed in the middle of that thick, gummy, deep swamp-like mass. The automatic vibrations of their shafts continued, but their bases were hopelessly gummed in. The crews were hurled off in all directions and fell helplessly into the gooey morass. We were saved. My ship was around at the other side, but we could walk it. Nadia signalled our thanks to the bugger, and it bounded off alone toward the distant horizon. As we walked, Nadia complimented me on my trick of the swamp. I glowed within, and turning to her, said, "Let us stay here and master this world, my Empress. I, Ajax Calkins, lay my heart and a planet at your feet." But women are fickle creatures, and cannot understand the ways of the great. She laughed, and said, "Don't be silly. My husband is waiting for me at our own spaceship." And then, when we found that my ship had, while I had been away, sunk into the swamp completely, and that we would have to walk the 20 or so miles to Nadia's craft, she laughed even louder. Women do not appreciate destiny. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And don't forget to check out the channel. There's hundreds of stories. Hundreds of stories.